хочу сказати, з деяких майданчиків засобів масової інформації дійсно йде велике залякування, що завтра буде війна.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster.
To talk about steps that would need to be taken if anything starts to flow through this pipeline to make sure that any damage done to Ukraine, in fact, is not done.
This is even before Nord Stream 2 has been completed. So I think it's really critical that we act now. I think we have a misguided policy right now coming from your boss, the president. I think it's in our national security to impose sanctions on Nord Stream 2 now. Why is it not in our national security to impose those sanctions?
As you know as well, the pipeline construction began in 2018. By the time we took office, it was more than 90% complete. And as we looked at this, it became clear to us that the actual joining of those last pipes was not going to be stopped by sanctioning the overall entity Nord Stream 2 AG or the CEO. Having said that, two things are very important. One, the waiver that we issued can be rescinded at any time. Second, what has to happen, there are two things that have to happen, and they are, I think, happening. Germany is coming to the table to talk about steps that would need to be taken if anything starts to flow through this pipeline to make sure that any damage done to Ukraine, in fact, is not done, is undone. And that, as we discussed a little bit earlier, involves several things. In fact, and the worst of all worlds would be a combination of pipeline physically completed, relationship with Germany poisoned, and no incentive for Germany to actually come to the table to engage in trying to mitigate the damage that could be done by the pipeline actually operating.
I would just point out, Mr. Secretary, that during your confirmation process, because you just talked about the last few meters, you reiterated your opposition to the Nord Stream 2, and you said, quote, "I am determined to do whatever we can to prevent that completion the last 100 yards." So the fact that it was 90% complete when you came into office and the administration came into office, your commitment to us was the last 100 yards. I want to move on to the...
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster.
We are not sitting still. Even as we're engaged in diplomacy, even as we're engaged in dialogue, we are building up defense, we're building up deterrence. We've now provided to Ukraine more security assistance this year than in any previous year. We have rallied allies and partners around the world. We are preparing massive consequences for Russia if it invades Ukraine again. So you have to do both at the same time. You build up your defense, you build up your deterrence on the one hand, you engage in diplomacy and dialogue on the other.
Є не тільки агентурна інформація, у нас є навіть звукова інформація, де представники з України, скажімо так, з представниками Росії, скажімо так, обговорюють участь Ріната Ахметова в державному перевороті в Україні. Мені здається, що ми в стані війни вже 8 років, і тобто широкомасштабно, і чи продовження потужної ескалації з боку Росії чи з боку бойовиків, яких підтримує Російська Федерація. Я вважаю, що така ймовірність може бути щодня, але вважаю, що сьогодні іде залякування. Одразу хочу сказати, з деяких майданчиків засобів масової інформації дійсно йде велике залякування, що завтра буде війна. Що ми повинні знати? Ми повністю контролюємо наші кордони і повністю готові до будь-якої ескалації.